This webinar will discuss updates to FDM Chapter 122 for the 2024 FDOT Design Manual. There are just a few changes that we made to FDM 122 this year. I'll briefly go over the 4 items shown here to describe what we changed and why the change was made. The first update that we made to FDM 122 was actually made back in April of last year through a roadway design bulletin. The changes to this section bring the FDM criteria into alignment with current departmental practice for programming and development of safety projects by recognizing that safety projects are now determined by purpose and need and not just by funding category. So here on the screen is the previous language. The first sentence here was revised by removing the reference to safety funds and also to clarify that we're referring to projects that are developed solely to address documented safety problems. For those types of safety improvement projects, we do not require a design exception or variation for existing non-compliant features. The other revision that was made here was the deletion of the third sentence. This sentence talked about safety studies, and it was removed because there's actually nothing that defines exactly what a safety study should consist of. There's a variety of safety studies that are completed, but without a defined format, we felt it wasn't appropriate to include specific requirements to the safety study here in the context of design exceptions and variations. So here's the revised language that you'll find in the 2024 FDM. Notice the first sentence is different, and it simply refers to safety improvement projects developed to solely address documented safety problems. Over the last several years, FDOT has evolved the understanding of what constitutes a safety project beyond a narrow definition by project funding type, in other words, safety funds, to a focus on the purpose and need of a project. FDOT's practice for many years has been to exempt safety-funded projects from requirements for design variations and exceptions for non-compliant features when those features are not created by the project itself. For example, the installation of a mid-block crossing on a roadway with substandard travel lane widths would not require a design variation or exception for lane widths if the mid-block crossing itself did not create the substandard lane width condition. Another thing I want to be sure to point out is that safety improvements that are conducted as part of a larger project, such as a 3R project, will still have to meet the design variation or design exception criteria. The changes to FDM 122.1.1 only apply to projects with the sole purpose of addressing an identified safety problem. We've added an item here in FDM 122.4 for our documentation requirements under item 6A, impacts of the exception or variation to safety performance. Based on some recent changes in legislation, we wanted to provide some guidance on how we prefer crash report information be included in design exceptions and variations. Item 2 here gives a couple of different options to provide crash report data within your documentation. If you prefer to simply include a list of the crash report numbers rather than the crash reports themselves, you can do that. Or if you prefer to include the crash reports, the long forms, in your report, you'll need to be sure to redact all of the personal information from those crash reports before you include them within the document. You can find additional information in Florida Statutes 316.066 regarding the personal information that is considered to be confidential and would therefore require redaction if included in a report as documentation. Another revision that we made to FDM 122.4 was at the very end of the section where there was a hyperlink to a crash location verification status dashboard. This was an old and obsolete link that needed to be removed. I should note that the crash data is not certified. There used to be references to, quote, certified crash data in older versions of our design criteria. However, the better term to use is verified. The FDOT State Safety Office works to verify crash data, and this is something that they have always done and will continue to do. The verification process is used to confirm the precise location of the crash and also to add information or additional fields to the database to make the crash data more robust and usable for our purposes. An example of some of the data fields that the Safety Office adds would be the FDOT roadway ID number, noting if the crash occurred at an intersection or was influenced by an intersection, the crash lane, such as the third through lane from the center, and other similar data fields. In just a minute, I'll show you how to find out the verification status of any crash report that you get through Signal 4 Analytics, which is the tool that we use to access all of the crash data. So speaking of Signal 4, this next change is related to the transition from the older FDOT Crash Analysis Reporting System, or the CARS database, to the Signal 4 Analytics system. We've been moving towards having a single source for obtaining crash data for a while, and previously the FDM referred to both systems in the section here on the historical crash method. So now that we're only using Signal 4, we're cleaning up the language here. So the change is simply removing the reference to CARS and adding a statement about the Signal 4 database, including all currently available crash data and all location verified statuses. And if you see there at the end of the new sentence, it says, i.e. verified as well as preliminary. I'm going to explain what that means now because we often get questions about verified versus non-verified crash data. When you download crash data from Signal 4, you should receive a zip file that contains folders with the crash data you specified through the website. One of these folders should be called FDOT tables. Within the FDOT tables folder, you should have an Excel spreadsheet called Crash Roadway Vehicle Driver. If you open up that Excel file, you'll see a summary of crashes at your selected project location. And if you look at columns E through H, you'll find the verification information. Column E will tell you that the crash report has either been verified or that it's preliminary. If it says preliminary, look at the next column over in column F to see what the status of the verification process is, or the preliminary geolocation status is. The next two columns, G and H, provide details of the edit and review process, so you can see where in the overall verification process the crash report is currently at. If the DOT edit status column says corrected, then that means that the crash report has been reviewed and the location has been corrected, but it has not received a final QC yet. So to explain what each of these means, let's look at each one of them. Here's a quick breakdown of what each of the preliminary geolocation statuses mean. If it says mapped by editor, then we have a very good confidence in the location of that crash. It's just waiting on that final QC before it's considered to be verified. For mapped by officer, we also have a fairly good confidence in that location. That's a crash report where the officer has specifically mapped the location of the crash. For mapped confidently by computer, that's also a crash report with relatively good confidence of the location because it's been located by a computer based on the address in the crash report, and only a single geographic location has been found by the computer. The next value of mapped approximately by the computer is located by a computer based on the road names in the crash report, and it's found multiple matches for the roads. So, for example, if you have a divided multi-lane road, the computer actually sees that as 2 intersection points. And then if that divided multi-lane road intersects another divided multi-lane road, the computer will actually see 4 intersection points. So due to the way that the computer identifies locations for crashes that are identified in this way, the accuracy is not quite as good as the other methods. And then the final value of plotted at report lat long uses the latitude and longitude that's noted in the crash report. This also has a level of accuracy that is not quite as good as these other methods, and it depends on how it was coded in on site by the officer. So that's a quick description of what all these different geolocation status terms mean. Ultimately, if you have a crash report that you want to make sure is valid, you can always read it and make your own determination as to whether it's located accurately within the Signal 4 system. So hopefully that clears up what we mean by verified crashes, whether they are verified or preliminary. The last revision I'm going to cover is the updated Form 122B, the Design Variation Memo form. Based on feedback we've received, and to try to make it more user-friendly, we added fields for design speed, posted speed, and context classification. There's also a field for other project information where you can add more information such as goes with project information or other relevant information for your project. And we added a heading here showing that the approved, denied, and additional documentation checkboxes are meant for district use only. So hopefully these little additions help provide additional information and clarify things on this form a little bit more. This concludes the webinar on FDM 122 updates for the 2024 FDM. Thank you for your time.